I think it's an absolutely ridiculous thing to say, and I'm sure that most other people see that as well. Harvard is not escalating anything by simply defending its constitutional rights. That's like would be saying if the government comes in and shuts down a newspaper for saying things they don't like, or tries to shut down a law firm, which incidentally is what the Trump administration has been trying to do, that when that newspaper or that law firm or that university pushes back and says we have a constitutional right to speech, that is an escalation. That's completely against American traditions and American values. When the government attacks people, if they fight back, that is not an escalation of something. It's simply defending your own rights.
You just heard a Harvard professor defend a lawsuit against the Trump administration, and he's not holding back. The accusation that Trump's team is weaponizing civil rights claims to punish political enemies. It's not just about Harvard anymore. It's about every American's right to dissent and a potential federal crackdown on academia. The gloves are off. Harvard is suing the Trump administration in a titanic showdown over academic freedom, and what you're about to hear might redefine the fight for free speech on campuses nationwide. Hit that subscribe button now, because this is the kind of no-spin breakdown they don't want you to see. The fight ignited when the Trump administration froze federal funding to Harvard, demanding sweeping changes to the Ivy League giants' policies. Among the demands, that Harvard eliminate DEI programs, restructure hiring, and hand over all internal reports on anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias. Harvard refused, so the feds cut the money. Now Harvard is suing, framing this as an all-out assault on academic independence. And the stakes are massive, not just for Harvard, but for every private institution that could be next in line. A professor from Harvard, Ryan Enos, explains. But
I think it's an absolutely ridiculous thing to say, and I'm sure that most other people see that as well. Harvard is not escalating anything by simply defending its constitutional rights. That's like would be saying if the government comes.
Trump's education secretary hit back, insisting
Harvard's new lawsuit.
It was a letter that was intended to have both parties sit down again and continue their negotiations. That's what I sincerely hope.
Really? Because Harvard and more than 100 other universities saw it as a direct threat, a coercive attempt to force ideological reforms under the banner of civil rights enforcement. The government's side claims this is not about free speech, but about protecting Jewish students. Yet when confronted, Harvard's professor doesn't buy it. And
similarly, the administration, the Trump administration, is making claims about things that in many ways violate common sense. It's a pretext in order to attack what they
his words get sharper.
Consider to be their political enemies. Donald Trump does not care about anti-Semitism, and I don't think any reasonable person would believe he does. He has people in his inner circle that give Nazi salutes. He's dined with white supremacists, and they have said...
That's not a spin. That's a direct quote from Harvard's faculty. Let's talk facts. The Anti-Defamation League has reported a record high in anti-Semitic incidents, many on college campuses, including in Massachusetts. So yes, there's a real concern, but here's the twist. Professor Enos explains that what the Trump administration is labeling as anti-Semitism often includes students protesting U.S. support for Israel or the war in Gaza, protected free speech. He warned
Gaza from anti-Semitism. And if we start conflating those two things, then we are in very dangerous ground, because people in the United States have...
And here's the bombshell.
Anti-Semitic. And if you look at what the Anti-Defamation League has claimed, most of those incidents that they claim are incidences of people protesting a war. And that is clearly not anti-Semitism. And in fact, it's something that we should...
That's the real tension. Harvard is saying, yes, address hate, but don't turn political protest into a crime. The administration is saying, play by our rules or lose your funding. And it gets darker. Harvard's lawsuit warns that the freeze could jeopardize more than 10% of its research funding, including programs fighting cancer, Alzheimer's, and Lou Gehrig's disease. As Enos puts it,
take steps to redress, but it is not something that requires the cancellation of things like cancer funding for cancer research or research on Alzheimer's disease or all the other things that Donald Trump has tried to attack for political purposes.
If this sounds like a nightmare scenario, it's because it is. Harvard has money and power, but what happens to smaller schools that don't? Enos said,
Supreme Court, what do you think, Professor, the effect of this fight on higher education in America is going to be here in the near term and in the next few years?
Well, look, if the United States government brings to the full brunt of its power against institutions like American universities, then of course it can be very...
This isn't just some campus squabble. The lawsuit reveals that Harvard is staring down the full force of the US government, accusing it of targeting dissent under the guise of civil rights enforcement. Professor Enos drops the truth.
Well, look, if the United States government brings to the full brunt of its power against institutions like American universities, then of course it can be very, very damaging. And I think that's something we need to understand.
Let that sit for a moment. This isn't about Harvard being woke or rich. It's about a model for national education, research, and innovation being threatened for refusing to bend to political pressure. The Trump administration's playbook is crystal clear. Use selective outrage, like campus anti-Semitism claims, as leverage to gut programs they dislike. But Harvard says, not today.
Government funding from universities more generally, then that could have a devastating effect on the beneficial things that
This is not just about Harvard's endowment or left-wing politics. It's about whether any private institution can remain autonomous when the government wants to control what they teach, who they hire, and how they speak. The closing moments of this showdown are sobering. Enos doesn't flinch. He calls out what many are thinking, but few dare say.
Enemies. Donald Trump does not care about anti-Semitism, and I don't think any reasonable person would believe he does. He has people in his inner circle that give Nazi salutes. He's dined with white supremacists, and they have said over and over.
And he's not talking in metaphors. He's talking about real threats to academic independence. Because once the precedent is set that the federal government can freeze medical research over political disputes, there's no turning back. And Harvard isn't backing down. They've sued. The American Association of University Professors has joined the fight, and more than 100 universities are standing in solidarity, warning that this fight will define the future of higher education. Because this isn't about free speech in theory. It's about whether dissent is punished by policy, and as Enos bluntly puts it,
not anti-Semitism. And in fact, it's something that we should welcome in this country because we believe in dissent on college campuses or anywhere else.
Yeah, I do want to.
If the government starts policing protests by cutting research dollars, the ripple effects won't just hit the Ivy League. They'll hit every state school, every public campus, every student who dares to ask hard questions. This is bigger than Harvard. This is about the soul of American education. So ask yourself, who decides what's allowed to be taught, discussed, protested? And if the answer is Washington, what happens to the truth? Subscribe now, because we're not done yet. We'll be covering every twist, every filing, every explosion in the courtroom. This is the front line of America's war on free thought. Don't miss what comes next.